So I would like to provide some exercises that can give you an experiential understanding of where we're going with all of this. Now, what I would like you to do is to imagine for a moment these words written horizontally. So at the top, you'd have external dimension, then underneath that thinking dimension, then underneath that emotional dimension, underneath that biological, underneath that essence, underneath that I am. And just imagine there's a line that just connects each one of those dimensions so that they do and are connected to one another, but again, they all have different functions and different modes of operation, modus operandi. Now, the problems arise because of collapsing or confusing one level with another. And in the process of collapsing or confusing levels, there's a tendency to try to overcome one level with another level. Sometimes this happens because as a child, let's say, for example, you're incredibly angry and your mother gives you food or cake. All of a sudden, years later, using the biological dimension of eating to overcome the emotional dimension called anger. Or, let's say, for example, you go to church and they give you a doctrine, and the doctrine is you should always be loving towards everybody, even if they're your enemies. And that becomes a doctrine, that becomes a should. At that point, you have an essential experience called unconditionally loving, but it becomes a doctrine of should at a thinking dimension. I should feel this way. So there's a confusion and a collapsing of the levels, or try and overcome one level with another level. Basically, essence of unconditional love or peace or spaciousness is always there. But you can't try to make your thinking or emotional level unconditionally loving, for example. It just never works. So I've never met anybody who was always unconditionally loving. But I never met anybody whose essence was not always unconditionally loving. So the first thing I want to do is to focus on the thinking dimension. So the thinking dimension, just as a quick review, is your thoughts, your beliefs, your values, your images. They're all things that occur at a thinking/cognitive level. So the first step to go beyond them and to inquire into them is to use several very, very old forms of meditation. One, of course, by the famous saint who died in 1950 named Ramana Maharshi, who we'll discuss in more greater depth in a later session. And he was very, very well known for his, what he called Atma-vichya. Atma-vichya means self-inquiry, which is really translated as, who am I? The way the meditation works and the way I use it in groups is that if we were in a workshop right now, I would pair up with a partner, or people would pair up with one another, and one person A, we'll call them, would just say what came into their mind. And person B would say, to whom does this thought arise? Person A would respond, to me. Then the person B would respond with, who is this I? So rather than who am I, which implies a question, who am I, and an answer, who is this I? The purpose of this is to move you from subject I to object. What that means is, if I have a thought called, I hate myself, if I say, who is this I, rather than I hate myself, I am now witnessing the thought called, I hate myself. I get that it's not me. So rather than me being I subject, I hate myself, I now witness, and the I hate myself becomes an object to be witnessed. So in workshops, people pair up like this, going back and forth for about 5 or 10 minutes on each side. So what I'd like you to do is, whenever a thought comes up, you're going to ask, to whom does this thought arise? Respond with, it arises to me. then ask, who is this I? To whom does this thought arise? It arises to me. Who is this I? If and only if another thought comes up, inquire, to whom does this thought arise? It rises to me. Who is this I? To whom does this thought arise? It arises to me. Who is this I? Only if a thought arises, you ask, to whom does this thought arise? It arises to me. Who is this I? What you'll notice is that as the thought arises, when it's inquired into, it subsides and there's a space. That space is the no-state state, the stateless state of I am, of no thoughts, memory, emotions, associations, perceptions, attention or intentions. And this inquiry can continue on. It doesn't have to be done in your own room with incense burning and your eyes closed. It can continue on when you're driving or when you're at the post office or any place you go during the day. The important thing to remember about meditations is that not one meditation does it all. What we'll continue to expand on as we move along is there are certain meditations that are good for thinking states, which is in this particular grouping. There are certain meditations that are better for emotional states, which we'll do a little later on in the session. When I used to teach meditation in the early 80s in New Mexico, it was a 12-week course. It met once a week, and each time we met, I went over 10 different meditations. So it was almost 120 meditations. Each one was very, very specific for specific reasons and purposes. As one form of therapy cannot do it all for all dimensions, so too, one form of meditation is not appropriate for everyone and for different issues that come up. So oftentimes when you go to a guru or a teacher, they have thousands of disciples or students. So everybody gets the same mantra, the same yantra, the same tantra. For some people, a mantra might work. For some people, a mantra might not work. For some people, a yantra might be helpful. So for some people, it might not. There's so many people that it would be impossible for the guru or teacher to tailor-make it to the individual, which is exactly what needs to occur. Now, getting back to the thinking dimension, the illusion is, if you were to watch your thought process, it appears as though there's thought. So it's thought goes, I love myself, I hate myself, but it seems to go thought. Now, what actually happens if you could slow it down is, it's very much like the rhythm of the ocean. A thought arises, it subsides, there's a space. A thought arises, subsides, space. A thought arises, subsides, space. The oldest meditations are of two forms. One is to find the space between two breaths. The other is to notice the space between two thoughts. So if I were to slow down my mind, I would notice that a thought would arise. Imagine, for example, you're living with somebody, you're in a relationship, and a thought arises that says, God, I really don't want to be in this relationship. And you all of a sudden identify with that thought as you. And then a whole series of thoughts continues after that. I knew I shouldn't have gotten into this relationship. Why did I move in with them? I should never have done this. Is a repeat of a pattern, and so on and so on and so on. Shortly thereafter, maybe after breakfast or after leaving for work, all of a sudden a thought arises that says, God, I really enjoy the relationship. And you identify it as you. The next thing you know, I'm glad I'm in the relationship. This person is the right person for me. All relationships have ups and downs, but this one really, really works and I'm getting what I want. That thought subsides, another thought arises which says, God, I can't stand my work. And then that goes into a whole tailspin. Why did I take this job? I never should have majored in psychology. I should have majored in biology. I never should listen to my mother. I never should have my father. And it goes on and on and on. And then it subsides. And eventually another thought arises which says, God, I'm really glad I studied what I studied. And I'm really glad I didn't do something else. And this absolutely works for me. I get to do exactly what I want.